Welcome to the Genealogy radio show, the radio show that's keeping you in the loop. And this week's show is all about naming patterns. Naming patterns for surnames, naming patterns for places, and naming patterns for spaces as well. We look at a variety of different sources which are important for the Irish researcher, and it's important to realise that without geographical information, it's very hard to find out which branch or where or how people came to different countries and different spaces and so on. And we've got various different means of overcoming our naming pattern brick walls, and we'd like to share them with you today for the Genealogy radio show. Irish records do usually need knowledge of geographical fits or areas, and that's well known by people who teach and people who are learning Irish genealogy and Irish family research. And it's why we play a great store on it in our schools and lectures and in the radio show as well, because it is important that you get to grips, if you can, with some of the sources that are going to give you links to the Irish language. And in the last 10 years, we have an abundance of those sources. We have Loganum, which gives databases of place names, extremely important when you're looking for place names and trying to match them within counties and areas to match your ancestral research. We'll be putting these links up of Loganum and talking about them as to what they do and so on. But first of all, we really need to look at some of the sources that we have in Irish genealogy and come to grips with seeing how they can be used. Brian Mitchell is an expert on place, and he has used it to great avail in Derry and is an expert on a genealogical atlas. That's why I put it as a highly recommended book for genealogy researchers. He notes, it might seem matter of fact, Ireland is divided into 32 counties, but he talks about that division beginning in the 12th century, reflecting the new invasion of the English system of local government in Ireland, and I would refer to that as the Anglo-Norman invasion. It's often just called the invasion. The boundaries reflected the lordships of the major Gaelic families later on, and by the 16th century and 17th century, we have every area in Ireland shired or made a county of. In relation to Ireland, from the 17th century, the civil parish, based on the early medieval and monastic and church settlement, and Dr. Paul McCutter is an expert on this, was used. But he talks about it in the earlier medieval monastic and church settlements. And we can see that there are 2,508 civil parishes in Ireland. There are also Catholic parishes. Catholic parishes deviate somewhat to civil parishes. So you have to be aware of that. And I have referred to various different sources during the course of this season of S.W. Wilson surveys and so on. Within the parish, there is the townland, and the townland is the smallest and most ancient in Irish land division, and there were 60,462 townlands in Ireland, and you kind of effectively, as Brian Mitchell says, identify an ancestral home when you have a townland. So do note what's on your gravestones, wherever your ancestors are buried, and even in more modern times, because it's going to give you a link and a key to the past and give you a place name option. John Grenham's site, which I firmly recommend as being a great help here, is also very useful. So we have Loganum. We have also got graveyard markers, so historic graves, aspects like that are all very good clues on how to generate your place name places. And a good book like Brian Mitchell's Genealogical Atlas of Ireland is significant when tracing your Irish ancestry. Last year in 2016, November 16, we had university researchers who revealed the origins of 45,000 names, England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland. 5,000 of them, led by a team of University of West English in Bristol, identified Irish surnames. And they were historical linguists, medieval historians, lexicographers, experts on Irish and Welsh surnames. They worked together on that project. And that should be available in a lot of major libraries now. It is useful in the fact that it looks at records dating from the 11th and 19th century. So frequently you can find a documentary record that you may not find in any other sources, bringing your surname back to an origin or a location or an occupation or a place. That is very useful in Irish historical research. The research that they used said that there was most up-to-date in techniques and that it created a detailed and accurate resource. So, very useful. Now, occupationally, you can have Gowan, McGowan, meaning smith or blacksmith. We can think of Shane McGowan to see how this translates into English. Shane wrote the song The Fairy Tale of New York, which is played a lot at this time of year. Other names linked to place, you could have that in English sense in Hill and Green, but you have surnames according to this account of being patronymic, which are originally enshrined in a father's name. So that's important that you start thinking of that. Now, Hickey, they give as a different origin of maybe being 15th or 16th century, but Hickey has, as it's well noted, two distinct clans, one of Dalmatian origin and the other in County Carlow. So we do need to be wary of sometimes looking at these dyed-in-the-wool end accounts that they are actually fully correct, because you can go right back with Hickey clans and bits and pieces, and you need to be able to do that, be able to research according to how far you can get back, and not be just thinking that a surname originated in the 1500s and not earlier than that. The English saw the clan system as a barrier to controlling the Irish to a certain extent, and that does happen in the Tudor conquest. And it's not true to think that they were outside and the Irish were inner. They were helping as well, but they wanted to hold and retain lands. So there's a lot of dynamics going on between clans, which may not be too popular to say, but is quite simply a fact of how people integrate and gain territories and migrate and so on. But we do have to look at the statutes of Kilkenny and other statutes that were brought in, trying to ensure that people took English surnames, spoke English, adopt English customs, and so on. So we have others that don't do that, though, that they hibernicize. So you have the Birminghams becoming MacPhirish, you have the Mandevilles, all these different things that we looked at during our recent seminar with Kenneth Nichols on protean surnames as well, which was a fascinating account of how surnames work and so on. Our naming patterns next, whatever about surnames and place names, we also have a fascinating naming pattern for first names in Ireland, and that is absolutely significant. There's a traditional Irish naming pattern, and the son's name: first son named after paternal grandfather, second son named after maternal grandfather, third son named after father, fourth son named after father's oldest brother, fourth son named after mother's oldest brother, sixth son named after father's second oldest brother. I know I have to put a hand up on this because it's very tricky indeed. Daughters' names: first daughter named after maternal grandmother, second daughter named after paternal grandmother, third daughter named after mother, fourth daughter named after mother's oldest sister, fifth daughter named after father's oldest sister, sixth daughter named after mother's second oldest sister. So you can see you'd want to have your family tree of who's who out in front of you to see how that deviates and how that works. We also had a show on the O and the Mock in Irish surname patterns, and that's very significant because we do have a significant amount of the O's becoming adapted and lost and being used and not being used. So that's very significant in Irish naming patterns as well, that you realise that according to as time goes on, things change. There's also kind of stereotypical stories that happen, that people go, oh, they changed their name because they couldn't get work and so on. They may have changed their name because somebody transcribed their name in a different way and they became known as that name. And it became, according to sound, it sounded different. It became written differently. Variants in surnames are very, very common. And they're very common in Ireland, let alone when people went to a different country where English was the dominant language and Irish dialect wasn't the dominant space to be in. So we do have to realise that they're going to a new land in some cases where they're adapting to a new landscape and people are making their surnames sound differently and language changes over time. So these are all aspects of things that we do need to look at when we're looking at various different aspects. We see that variants in surnames come about naturally as well, due to the passage of time. So it's not really so much an ideological stance or something that we can really put a simple answer on of, yes, there was clear discrimination or bits and pieces and things like that. Now, some of the sources I looked at were the Townland sources, and I also looked at Log Anam, and I also came across some interesting essays that were very useful in finding on different sources for that. So, the place names database history benefits.pdf was a very useful one to have because it gave me various different sources into Reverend Charles Reeves, who wrote a paper on the townland distribution of Ireland, and he wrote various different aspects of that. Brian O'Keefe, different mappings, little maps on what the Irish names were in Donegal. So I will put these up on the blog, and of course maps telling you the story of surnames and place names, especially if surnames are mentioned in them, because I look a lot at the 16th century maps, and indeed surnames are the way that the landscape is being identified as who's who and where they are. In the 17th century, this distinctly becomes a different type of naming pattern, and in the 18th century, different again, with a differing reasons, with justices making maps and roads being made and so on. So again, we have wonderful knowledge of what we need to have in Irish language sources for place names, and just to know your naming pattern of your surnames is very important, and how you really look at what you need to be able to do. There are a variety of different sources that if you have place names, that it opens up as to who's living where and so on. And you can use the 1901 and 1911 census, not just for surnames, but for place names as well. The 1901 and 1911 census is a free resource in the National Archives of Ireland, and one that is very useful to start looking for place and name. And of course it brings in a new division, the District Electoral Division, which is important because it really means a lot when you're trying to resource and so on. And it's useful to start integrating your geographical knowledge with what you can start learning about. We do cover this a lot in our school, in Clans and Surnames, which will be held in May, and we do that in Nina, and it is a very valuable school to go to for the simple reason that you're learning space, place, name, and you're integrating it within your own family history as well. So we would ask organisations to send a delegate to go, because in many cases it's keeping up with the latest developments, DNA and so on, but matching it with a resource of place and space and name, with people who have the expertise and know how to navigate brick walls, because place naming, especially geographical place naming, is sometimes one of the biggest brick walls of them all. There are a number of different books and different dictionaries, and we would recommend MacLeison's Surname Dictionary because that gives a very comprehensive mapping system as well in the back of the book as to where places are and so on. And these type of resources are very useful for mapping and so on. Also, any aspects you have of Irish civil registration, exploring Irish genealogy, any of these directories and so on are reliant sometimes on place. Registration districts, which come in the 1860s in Ireland, are very important to you. A map of the registration district is huge. For example, you'd have many ancestors born in Fecal and very far away from Scariff town. Yet, if you were to look at a registration district, it's Scariff. And you might presume that they were, Scariff is not that big, so you might presume, oh, well, they're from Scariff. But they're not. They're actually from 8 and 9 miles away. So registration districts are important for you to know the whole scope or range of registration district. And I would say for anybody researching in 19th century, it's important for you to understand exactly what records are available and how they're working out. Because once documentation begins, it's very important indeed. For example, in County Clare, you could have about 9 registration districts, and to know the whole county, it's important to see how they intersect. You could have some that are available on a border, and again, a naming system of the registration districts is extremely important. We also have the General Register's Office, and we have got the surnames by Matheson. We did a whole entire show on that. That will tell you the frequency of the surname as well. And it's very important to realise that people from the West, and that would be far more likely maybe to go to the US, Canada or England rather than maybe to Dublin. So how people move and migrate is important. We see a massive migration from Dublin to Limerick in the late 19th century. And indeed, that's something that needs to be explored as well, that you're not necessarily going from a small place to a big city. You could be going from a big city to a smaller city where there is work available. People are following work, and that lends itself to what economics is doing at the time. Limerick is a thriving city at this time with a very strong meat industry, and that needs to be looked at when you're looking at emigration and migration as well of surnames that come from one place to another. So cemetery records, immigrant tombstones, cemetery records, they often include Irish county and sometimes a parish or a townland. And I've actually seen these where they don't have the county at all, they just have the townland. And people are looking for a townland that was known in 1830 but no longer exists except in memory. So again, your place is really, really important. What it sounds like, what you can make it sound like, where you may think somebody is from, and so on. And then you can start looking at various different aspects to look at various different sources. Your records where you are just as important to link you to where people were. Often anything that is on a record has to be transcribed exactly. So that's exactly so that you are not filling up your memory with what you think or with myth. You're dealing with documentary fact that can be verified all the time. Constantly people will want an answer. They will want to be told a certain answer. Unfortunately, it's not possible to do that when you're adhering to documentary fact and evidence. And it's important that we do, because everything is online now. It's very easy to take something that isn't verified from something and put it into something that is, and thus distort the whole historical record that we have. And that happens frequently in place. It's very easy, as I said, a count where you have Kilkenny Cross in Mayo, and someone may think, oh, that's in County Kilkenny. Not that they did in this instance, but it's just something that could lead to very much a misconception of space and place. So that's all for today. We're just going to make a few announcements of some of the things that are coming up in the new year in Ireland. So if you're around in May the 24th, you have the Cork Genealogical Society Day, which is a wonderful day in the Silver Springs Hotel, and that is well worth a visit. And of course, our own Clans and Surnames in Nina, May the 14th to the 18th, is well supported, and we are open with an online registration available at the clansandsurnames.com site, a link to that and a full list of the speakers going up and so on, and very well worth your while. In relation to our shows, they are all podcast, so you can hear them on the Clans and Surnames Genealogy Show archive page. They're well supported now with the blog and links to that. And this show supports RCB, Radio Corcabashkin, the radio show that's keep you in the link. We hope we've helped today with some of our sources, Log Anam, the Gazetteers and so on, and searching for your Irish ancestry using registration, using the census, using what's online. And I have read an account where just about 8% of what you can find out genealogically is online in Ireland. So that leaves another 92% unexplored and available for you to find. The records are coming up online as we speak more and more, but we do need to tack into the fact that there are sources like my own that draw attention to this that we need to be reminiscent of. So that's all for today, folks. Goodbye for now.